Hello, hello. Today we're going to look at CICD observability, actually trying to understand what's going on under the GitHub Actions workflows. And I think I have a visitor today that you already know. Raphael, welcome back.
Hello, Johannes. Thank you for having me back on your show.
Once again, getting you into your new role. Firstly, doing something with me, which is pretty cool because I actually never spent time on talking about CICD observability. I have a few other sessions focused around the same topic, but today we're going to look at how can I enable observability for my GitHub Actions workflow. I think you're going to be the expert and going to help me to activate things and make sure that it actually works. Let's look at what we already prepared. But before we go there, why the hell do you think that we need observability in a CI/CD pipeline, Raphael?
So when we are already observing our running systems that serve the customer purposes, like our production systems, and we should do the same for pipelines as well, because we get a lot of insights throughout monitoring our pipelines, like how fast can you actually deploy to production when there is an incident. So you need to have some reference metrics, or which job is taking the most of the time, or if there is a failure, what could be the root cause of this failure? Is it one specific agent? For example, if you have a multiple build agent, it could be always one agent that is failing for a certain workflow, or is it one step, or is there an increase of build time, or do our tests take gradually longer than expected or increasing over time? So if you want to investigate your pipelines and optimize it, then you need to have some insights into your pipelines. If you have some SLOs, how to fast to deploy something, or some other metrics that you're interested in, then observability for CI pipelines can be a crucial part, or make it way easier to troubleshoot and identify the root causes.
Yeah, and at the end also, if you are in a situation where you really work on continuous deployment strategies and your product changes are stuck within your CI/CD pipeline for too long, think of a security remediation that you need to pass through very fast and the pipeline gets stuck or gets slow, right? Then it is important to be able to look into it. I think if we come to the topic from logs, traces, and metrics, which is kind of the baselines for CI/CD, for observability in general, right? Then I would say this is also something that in the DevOps world we have seen in terms of collecting DORA metrics and other developer experience KPIs that will also help us to do that. Having a proper setup in place to do that is something that is definitely going to help as well. Now, we met briefly at KubeCon this year. One of the very hot topics over there was the topic of observability in general, not only with startups like Serial coming along, but also with the topic around OpenTelemetry. Maybe we can spend 1 or 2 minutes to explain a little bit what the concept behind that is and what the hell we actually do.
Yeah. So with OpenTelemetry, we now have like an open standard how to describe our traces, logs, and metrics. So in the past, a lot of vendors defined their own schemas and formats how to describe these different kind of pillars. But in the end, it all boiled down to the same results for the end customers. And with OpenTelemetry, we now have probably the last instrumentation you will ever deploy to your system. So it is not vendor specific anymore. It's rather you instrument it for observability, and then you send the data to someone else to get the insights of your data you own, you generate. And this is the big advantage of betting on OpenTelemetry instead of some vendor specific instrumentations. If you, for example, look at all the agents, all the providers developed in the past decade of years, so everyone was solving the same task over and over again and reinventing the wheel over and over again just to adhere to their schematics and formats. So with OpenTelemetry now we solve that and can solve it together in a big community rather than multiple providers, and focus on the insights we generate from the data.
Yeah, which brings an interesting topic around observability, OpenTelemetry in the CNCF, and I'm going to cover that in another video. And so we'll not spend more time on that today. Let's rather dive into the topic now. We're looking at a GitHub Actions pipeline, and we're going to see if we can somehow instrument that. Does that mean that I need to use my own GitHub action to actually do that, or what's the process to do that?
You could add a job or a step for every pipeline, but it's way easier to use one of the open source GitHub Actions that actually hooks in to the GitHub API and uses a trigger to run after a workflow has finished, then gather all the data from the workflow run and extract the relevant tracing information for you, and then send it off to somewhere else that is OpenTelemetry compliant, like a local running OpenTelemetry collector, or your observability provider, or maybe even to AWS natively.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a workflow initially that doesn't work as expected, a very simple one, which does CDK bootstrap. You can see that on the screen now. And we're going to first implement a post-workflow processing implementation of collecting observability metrics. I think what I don't like about that is that this is going to be an asynchronous log files and metrics collection at the end, because it happens after the workflow has been finished. Is that correct?
That's correct. So, but it's the easiest way to not interfere with your pipelines. It's like a one account setup per repository. You only have to add this workflow once, and it can cover all the workflows and running in the same account.
Okay, simple and easy sounds good for me. Let's look at what we already started and prepared. So we're going to use -0 as an OpenTelemetry collector. We have already set up an organization for testing and a data set for that. If you then go into the GitHub integration, what you're going to see over here is that you need to do 2 steps. We have already done the first step, and now I remember why we didn't want to record that, so I'm going to need to blur that. And then we have the second step where we're going to need to introduce a new workflow into our repository. That's the stuff that we're going to do now, right? This is the repository, and it's currently private, so you're not going to be able to see it. But we will introduce a new workflow that then collects OpenTelemetry metrics. So for that, I am going to go, and I think that this is going to be too small to read. So let's try to make a little bit.
Yes, make it bigger for the audience.
Out.
So quick remark. So the guide you saw a few seconds ago, it's also available publicly. So it is basically our -0 guide to how to use this open source GitHub Actions. So you can either read our public page for the integrations hub or go to the GitHub Actions directly and see the documentation there as well. Yeah, that's the GitHub Actions we use under the hood.
Okay.
And it has also a more detailed explanation how it works.
Okay, cool. That's perfect. And this is the collector that we're going to use. We're just setting the OTel collector and the OTel header. I think what we need to adjust is this here, right? I think here I'm going to need to add the bootstrap, which is the name of the workflow. And if I want to also look at deploy Helm, I need to record that. And then I have a deploy and a cluster status, which is, I think, one which would be interesting at the end. Okay, anything else I need to do?
No, that should be fine. Commit and deploy or push.
Let's do that.
I think you could also use like a wildcard selector for the workflows if you want to cover all workflows automatically.
I think potentially I could even remove all of that, right? And then it would cover all workflows automatically. You're right. What is interesting is that I can also decide to not capture traces then on all statuses, right? Because essentially if I have, I want to capture only the failures, right? That I can change that to failure. Okay, so now let's go back to the workflow and execute that and see what happens. And initially we will see that this workflow is hopefully going to fail within 1 minute.
So this is a quite simple workflow with like only one job, but multiple steps. Looks like it's setting up a Node.js environment, of course, configure the AWS credentials to log into your AWS account, install the dependencies, run a build, and then we will see if it's successful or not. And once you see the pipeline is done, you will see this second workflow actually kicking off that is collecting the tracing information and sending it off to our provider.
Okay. And this workflow is obviously generative AI generated these days?
Of course.
Yeah. We can talk about that next time. I have a few findings on actually using all of that. Okay, so now it's gonna go into the Bootstrap action, and now what I kind of see is that I can see it in here, right? But in my how do I get back to the metrics over here?
Not yet. So we don't send any data yet. Once the workflow is done, it will as you said. Once the workflow is done, it will kick off the second workflow that will then collect data and send it to this case -0, or it could be any other OpenTelemetry compatible backend.
Okay, that's why also we can't see anything in this testing organization right now.
Yes.
Okay, and we can see it's still checking for telemetry. Okay, so let's see. Now, this already failed. Yes, this was expected. And now we're not going to analyze why the Bootstrap failed. But once this is now completed, we should now see that the new action is kicking off, which actually does the collection of it. And if it doesn't, then we did something wrong. It looks like we did something wrong.
Did you commit to main?
Yes.
Do we have it? You didn't put that workflow run, maybe? Is it the name of the workflow? It was Bootstrap CDK, right?
Workflow is Bootstrap.
That's the
file you're right.
name, but you overrode it with the with a workflow name. So this is actually the workflow name, how it is specified in your file.
I would suggest that we update that. Okay, this should
better readability makes sense.
Collect CD traces. Okay. Then let me directly, and yes, of course, we're not gonna have this and record. Yeah. This is because Johannes doesn't know much about GitHub Actions, you know? Just touched.
But maybe we need to highlight that even more in our documentation as well to make it clear that it is the workflow name.
And you really think I read the documentation?
If you're not reading it, at least the GenAI tool you will use in the future need to have some hint what to fill in or how to hallucinate some new workflow names.
And that's correct. Okay, so we're now going to run the workflow and see if it is now able to connect observability data afterwards. As we just that we have the name of the collecting workflow that is going to be collect CICD traces. And then we have here the workflow names that it should react on. And we're going to see if that actually now runs at the end of this one. Ding dong, ding dong.
What is new in AWS around CICD? Maybe we need to cover the timestamp.
Nothing. Not enough.
Nothing new.
I would say. At the moment, there has not been many updates from code pipeline, code build teams. And I would say a lot of the things have been built into GitLab these days. I'll need to do a video on that as well. Actually, we would need to see can we integrate OTel with GitLab as well in CICD? I think that there is a collector as well, but I haven't really looked at that.
From your experience, what is exported by code pipeline? Is there also like log files or something to reconstruct the flow through the pipeline? Is there an event, CloudTrail, event bus event, something like that?
Yes, you could. But as far as I know, there is no OTel support for code pipeline or code build right now, which is something that I would really love to see. So that means that you would need to somehow replicate something similar than here, right? That we do with the post action. So I kind of said it earlier, right? But it would be better to see feedback directly instead of a little bit later. So now we see that the workflow fails. We will be looking at the simple version of the execution later in this video, so stay tuned. Now let's move over to the more complex one that we prepared. Now we're going to look at a little bit more complex CI/CD pipeline that Raphael has prepared. So Raphael, let's look at your CI/CD pipeline, and maybe you can spend a few minutes to explain what it's going to do and how it looks like in the observability tool.
Sure. So let me quickly bring up my screen. So we now have, we see my screen right. So let's say we have a more complex workflow, like this release workflow, where we have some pre-flight some checks in the beginning, then we have a metrics build, then we do our test steps with 5 jobs in parallel, end-to-end testing, unit testing, quality checks, publish, like you normally would have in a real-world scenario where you deploy to a production system. So in this case, this system actually was successful, but if you go back to our release workflow view, you see there were a lot of other workflows that failed. So if I'm in a scenario like this, I, of course, could now go into every step and see, okay, this time it was a quality check, and this time it was some check in the build step, in this case, a Windows build. But this could be a little bit cumbersome and take a lot of time to analyze which part of the pipeline actually is failing. So I, again, integrated with our tool, the same workflow you build up, we use the same one for our system in this case. And let's bring up the data we see in the system. So
there's a lot of reds on your side. That's what we're going to try to understand now, I hope, right?
Yes. This is now our view on the same data. You saw the list in GitHub. So this list was also a lot of red. And of course, it's hopefully red here as well. So I'm focused on the last 6
but
hours.
Raphael, I still see only the GitHub Actions overview. So maybe we need to check your screen share. Now, better? Better. Yeah. This is now.
So if you now go into the tool, you see basically the same data again, but now you have a better insight into your workflow. So you directly see the duration of each workflow file, and since we have like a trace view on the system, we can simply open up the trace view and then see, okay, this is our pipeline. It took 45 seconds. 80 seconds were spent in the build step, and you see like a waterfall graph of the pipeline as well. Or if you switch to the flame graph, maybe that's more visual for pipelines. You can directly see when happened what, and you can see, okay, this case was the quality check that failed. You can click on each of these steps in the pipeline, see the additional attribute. Okay, this was a failure. This was step number 5. And if you click on the job itself, you can always go back to the pipeline itself. So I think it is the suite URL, which some of the links are the job URL, would bring you directly to the logs or whatever you need to troubleshoot further. But this is just the view of one trace or one pipeline run, the more power comes in. You can, of course, filter down for these things. You can group, for example, pipeline name, and then have some general metrics like this workflow has 15 runs, 14 of them failed. So we have an error percentage of 93% of our workflow files or deployments fail. In average, it takes 1 minute and 55 seconds. The P99 latency is 5 minutes, around 5 minutes.
And this is now auto-discovered, right? So this is like automatically discovered by the OpenTelemetry collector at the end, right? That identifies this.
So the
numbers, I would say.
The OpenTelemetry, since you have a span view or a trace view, you can then build metrics based on these span durations. And in this case, it's, for example, it's just some statistics about the workflow span on the top and correlated across multiple runs.
Yeah.
And yeah. So this makes it way easier to identify the root cause. The same you could do, for example, steps, and then filter down only for the error steps, and you now see all you see which and if you then group by step name again, step.name, you can see, okay, which step is actually failing, how often, with which percentage, and how long do they take. In this case, since I'm having all not only the error, since I've filtered down only for the error ones, of course, I see a percentage of 100%. But if I go over to see all these steps, I can easily identify which step is actually failing.
Okay, cool. So this gives me the visibility into the pipeline itself, right? And actually checking what happens under the hood, right? I would also, I think I can also now see if the execution time for a specific step is gradually growing, right? So let's look at an example: run build job or run unit tests, right? We should be able to bring up a graph where we see the execution times passed over the last few executions, right? By filtering on one specific step, right? And then we would get a timeline, right? Which might be an interesting information, right? To see if we are adding more unit tests, it's getting slower, right? Obviously, because it takes longer. And I think that would be something that would be good to see as well.
Yeah, for example, if you go to the test end-to-end on staging, you see you can directly jump to the duration and see, okay, on average, that's the median value. Then you can correlate if one specific instance is somewhere out of the range, or if you go into triage, you see which attribute values are used or distributed in this value, and you can jump to the dashboard and, of course, add it somehow to a dashboard and build a graph based on this bad selection right now. You see, it can graph out the durations per each step, per each job, whatever you need.
No, I think this is going to be really interesting, right? If you can get data across multiple days and weeks, right? And then you see how things get faster or slower, right, within the pipeline. Because essentially, if there is no change in the number of unit tests, right, and there is still a change in the time, then you actually see that maybe something in the application has become slower as well, right? I think this is also going to be an interesting information that you can get out of this type of observability.
Yeah. For example, here I'm now plotting the duration per step name, and you can see most steps are somewhere between 23 seconds, but there are some outliers in the past. The simulate build latency in this case, of course, that's the one that is having an outlier because this step takes longer than the others as expected. And since you are already using an observability tool, you can, of course, do alerting on that as well. So you can make an alert when a step is above some certain threshold, or if our deployment takes longer than 1 hour, please send me an alert. And then I can investigate if it's just a one-time thing or something we need to adjust.
Cool. Yeah, I think this is cool. This is helpful. And I hope that we will be able to show more like that in the future. Okay, Raphael, I think this is really what we wanted to show today. So let me share my screen again and try to show the stuff from the simple CI/CD pipeline, right? So as you can see, my bootstrap action has failed, and that's the one that we were looking at earlier. If we then look at collecting CI/CD in traces, we see that this is now successful, right? So you can actually see that there is a trace collected over here. And then I will also be able to see in my test application now the same information, right? On the success or failure of the corresponding pipeline. I think something we didn't talk about is this one, right? The names that are being used here. The GitHub action that we use actually follows the OpenTelemetry conventions, I think, that we have, if I remember correctly, right? So that means all of the CICD.things are defined in the relevant CNCF semantic versioning, semantic naming conventions. Special interest group, as far as I remember. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And that gives you, the semantic convention give you new power, because now you have the same attribute name and convention for writing the values throughout the system. So for example, if a GitHub workflow run has a GitHub char associated, it is the same attribute name in the end as if you put the same information into your application itself. So you can directly correlate a trace that is collected from the application to a workflow run that published this. You don't have to like fiddle around and find the right attribute name. And one is maybe GitHub _char, and the other one uses GitHub.char. And if you apply to these semantic conventions, it makes way easier to correlate things or query data across multiple pillars.
Okay, so that means that I can then also take the information from the CI/CD pipeline and actually correlate that back to traces that I get out of my application runtime at the end. Okay, so let's do a very quick wrap up. So we have seen how important CI/CD observability is and can be. We have also seen how simple it is to post-collect the metrics, log files, and traces using a simple GitHub action that actually reads information from GitHub itself. We have also seen that the -0 how-to misses a permissions entry in the example workflow, which is something that I'm sure that we can add. Or maybe it's a setting on my GitHub. I don't know, right? But would be good to find out. And I think the last open question that I have for you, and maybe we can tackle that in a different recording, a different video, would be, how do I get this information live instead of post-processing, right? So what options do I have to collect log files, metrics, and traces directly out of the initial workflow instead of post-collecting it after the execution of the pipeline? Or do you have a quick idea on that already right now?
It will be challenging because GitHub in this case is not providing you like a feed for that. So the only way to get to this data is through the API itself. Otherwise, you would have to put a step after each step collected the data already, and that might be cumbersome as well. If you have self-hosted runners, then you, of course, collect the data directly from the host there, at least the logs. The tracing information, probably not, but some detailed informations that could be very interesting to also correlate maybe CPU time and memory consumption based on your self-managed runners.
So I can see a new video coming on the horizon using GitHub code build hosted runners to collect OpenTelemetry metrics from your CI/CD build. Maybe. If you're interested in that video, please let us know in the show notes, and then we'll spend some time potentially and record something like that. But I think this is a very good starting point to understand why CI/CD and why observability, sorry for that, in the CI/CD pipeline is important. Raphael, thanks again for spending time with me. And sorry for the little bit hurdles that we had today, but I hope that this was still good. And yeah, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.